The human spacer's heavy boots crunched on the charred bones of the executed Gamelon couple. John Phillips, a gruff man in his late 40s, swept his flashlight beam over the scene of slaughter, illuminating sprays of deep purple blood, still wet. No signs of life. He checked his scanner again. The distress beacon still pulsed close. Gun drawn, he advanced into the gloom of the derelict freighter, the reek of death and ionized plasma scorching his nostrils. A scuffling sound in the shadows. He whirled, finger on the trigger. Two pairs of terrified orange eyes stared back. Gamelon younglings no more than 12 and 8. The older one leveled a pistol with shaking hands. "Saint, stay back, I'll shoot!" John froze. He'd seen too many orphans in this forsaken universe, lost his own family years ago. Heart like a clenched fist ever since. This wasn't his problem. Yet something in the boy's brave, desperate face gave him pause. He remembered that feeling, facing the harshness of the world alone, fighting to survive. His finger eased off the trigger. "Easy, kid, not here to hurt you." The pistol barrel wavered. The boy swallowed hard. Who are you?" "John Phillips. I'm human. I'm here to help." Tears cut through the grime on the younger one's face. "Mom and Dad, I know, I'm sorry." John holstered his gun slowly. "You're safe now." He had a choice to make, fast. No Gamelon ships within 30 parsecs. Turning them over to foster age would be a death sentence. There was only one way to save them. No more running from what the universe dumped in your path. Time to step up. "I know I'm human, but you're with me now. I'll keep you safe, no matter what it takes. That's a promise." The older boy studied him, then slowly lowered the gun. "I'm Primus. This is my brother Nike." John nodded, straightened his shoulders. "Let's get you out of here." His life had just gotten a whole lot more complicated. But letting these orphans suffer alone, not an option. Even hardened old bastards had lines they wouldn't cross. Maybe there was still a shred of decency left in him after all. John led the Gamelon orphans up the creaking ramp into the rusty horizon's dimly lit cargo bay. Primus kept Nike close, one arm slung protectively around the smaller boy's shoulders. His orange eyes flicked warily around the cluttered space, taking in the jury-rigged repair equipment and salvaged ship parts. "That's not much, but she's sturdy," John said, patting a bulkhead. "She'll get us where we need to go." Primus fixed John with a penetrating stare. "And where exactly is that? What's your plan for us?" John met the boy's gaze, not backing down. "The plan is to keep you safe and alive. I'm not going to hurt you." "Why should we trust you?" Primus demanded. "We don't know anything about you." John sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Look, kid, I'm not going to spill my whole life story. All you need to know is that I'm here to help. That's it." He led them to the ship's small galley, gesturing for them to sit at the dented metal table. John rummaged in a storage locker, pulling out packets of dehydrated rations. As he prepared the meal, he laid out the rules. "While you're on my ship, you follow my orders," he said firmly. "No wandering off, no touching equipment without permission. If I tell you to do something, you do it. No arguments, it's for your own safety." Primus bristled at the authoritarian tone, but stayed silent. John set bowls of reconstituted stew in front of the boys. Nike poked at the unappetizing mush, lower lip trembling. Suddenly, the stress and trauma of the day crashed over him, and he burst into tears. John froze, spoon halfway to his mouth, unsure how to respond. But Primus was already in motion, pulling Nike into a tight hug and murmuring soothingly in their native language. He glared at John over his brother's head, as if expecting him to object to the display of affection. Uncomfortable with the raw emotion, John pushed back from the table. "I'll let you two finish up," he muttered, beating a hasty retreat. Later, after settling the boys in the spare cabin, John sat at the ship's computer terminal, poring over what information he could find on Gamelon culture and biology. He needed to be prepared to care for them properly, even if it was just for the short term. One fact leaped out at him: the exceptional strength of Gamelon sibling bonds. Older siblings, he read, often took on a parental role, fiercely devoted to protecting and nurturing their younger brothers and sisters. John sat back, realization dawning. No wonder Primus was so defensive, so suspicious of John's intentions. With their parents gone, the boy had stepped into the role of guardian, putting Nike's well-being above all else. His mistrust was born of love, and the primal need to shield his brother from further pain. A pang of sympathy twinged in John's chest. He understood that drive to protect your family at all costs. Maybe he had more in common with these alien orphans than he thought. John guided the rusty horizon through the star-speckled void, her engines humming a steady rhythm. The nearest space station with a Gamilon embassy was still days away, plenty of time for the reality of his new situation to sink in. He was responsible for these boys now, like it or not. As he ran through his daily maintenance checklist, a shadow fell across the control panel. Primus stood at his elbow, orange eyes intense as he watched John's every move. "What's that for?" the boy asked, pointing to the flux capacitor readout. John glanced at him, surprised by the technical question. "It regulates the ship's power flow, keeps everything balanced." Primus nodded, brow furrowed in concentration. "And that switch there?" "Engages the backup generators." John found himself explaining each system in detail, pleased by Primus's keen interest and quick comprehension. Over the next few days, Primus became John's constant companion during repairs and upkeep. The boy's nimble fingers and sharp mind made him a natural mechanic. John caught himself smiling as Primus successfully rewired a faulty circuit on his first try. "Not bad, kid," he said gruffly, trying to hide the warm glow of pride in his chest. "Keep this up and you'll be running your own ship someday." Primus ducked his head, but not before John saw the pleased flush on his scaled cheeks. Nike, on the other hand, seemed to crave affection and reassurance. He took to drawing pictures of his lost family, his mother's kind eyes, his father's strong hands. One night, he shyly presented John with a crayon portrait of the three of them together. John stared at the crude but heartfelt drawing, a lump forming in his throat. The kid had even included him, standing protectively over the little family. He cleared his throat, at a loss for words. "It's real nice, Nike, thank you." Nike beamed, hugging the drawing to his chest. John carefully pinned it to the galley wall, feeling a strange mix of emotions he couldn't quite name. But their fragile peace was shattered by a sudden, violent jolt. Alarms blared, as the ship shuddered under the impact of an energy weapon. John lunged for the comm panel, his blood running cold at the sight of the sleek black vessel looming on the view screen. He recognized it instantly, the Void Wraith, flagship of the notorious Gamilon crime syndicate. They'd tangled before, years ago, when John had exposed their illegal salvage operation to the authorities. He'd cost them millions in lost profits and equipment. They'd sworn revenge. And now they'd found him at his most vulnerable. The Void Wraith's captain hailed them, his scarred face leering from the screen. "John Phillips, you've got something of ours. Hand over the brats, and I'll consider letting you live." John's gut clenched. They knew about the boys. Nike whimpered, clinging to Primus, who glared at the screen with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Not a chance," John growled. "You want them, you'll have to come through me." The captain laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "With pleasure. We'll see how long you last when we start carving pieces off you." The screen went dark. Another blast rocked the ship, sending them staggering. John swore as warning lights flashed across the control panel, engines crippled, shields failing. They were sitting ducks. He turned to the boys, his face grim. "Listen to me. I need you to hide now, the smuggler's hold behind the false panel. Don't make a sound no matter what you hear, understand?" Primus nodded, jaw tight. He grabbed Nike's hand and pulled him towards the hold, determination etched in every line of his young face. John watched them go, something fierce and protective surging in his chest. He turned back to the controls, hands flying over the switches as he diverted all remaining power to the auto-repair systems. If he could just buy them a little time. The ship shuddered as the Void Wraith's docking clamps latched on, the shriek of rending metal filling the air. John drew his blaster, lips pulled back in a snarl. They'd take the boys over his dead body. The shriek of tortured metal filled the air as the Void Wraith's boarding tube punched through the rusty Horizon's airlock. John crouched behind a bulkhead, blaster drawn, heart pounding against his ribs. The Syndicate thugs poured into the corridor, weapons blazing, their faces twisted with malice. John fired back, his shots finding their marks with deadly precision. He ducked and wove through the ship's narrow passageways, using every trick he knew to stay one step ahead of his pursuers. But there were too many of them, and they were closing in fast. A searing pain exploded in his shoulder as a blaster bolt found its mark. John stumbled, his vision blurring. He forced himself to keep moving, leaving a trail of blood in his wake. He staggered into the engine room, his last stand. The thugs were right behind him, their footsteps echoing like a death knell. John raised his blaster, determined to go down fighting. Suddenly, the ship's lights flickered and surged. The thugs screamed as arcs of electricity coursed through their bodies, dropping them to the floor in twitching heaps. John stared in disbelief as Primus emerged from behind the engine console, his face streaked with grease and sweat. "I rerouted the power from the shields," he panted. "Gave them a little surprise." Together they dragged the unconscious thugs back to the airlock and sealed it behind them. John leaned heavily against the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The room spun around him, and he felt his knees buckle. Strong hands caught him before he hit the floor. Primus eased him down, his face tight with concern. "You're hurt bad," he said, his voice shaking. "We need to get you to the med bay." Nike appeared at his side, tears streaking his face. "Please don't die, John," he whimpered. "We need you." John tried to speak, but his tongue felt thick and clumsy. He felt himself being lifted, carried through the ship's corridors. Snatches of conversation floated around him, Primus barking orders, Nike's gentle reassurances. As he drifted in and out of consciousness, a profound realization washed over him. These boys, these alien children he'd rescued on a whim, had risked everything to save his life. And he knew, with a certainty that went soul-deep, that he would do the same for them in a heartbeat. When he finally opened his eyes, he found himself in the medbay, his wounds cleaned and bandaged. Primus and Nike were curled up in chairs beside his bed, fast asleep, their small hands clutching his. In that moment, looking at their peaceful faces, John felt something shift inside him. A wall he'd built around his heart, brick by bitter brick, crumbled to dust. These boys weren't just his responsibility anymore. They were his family. He squeezed their hands gently, a silent promise. No matter what the universe threw at them, he would be there. He would protect them, guide them, love them as his own. Because that's what family did. John guided the rusty Horizon into the bustling spaceport, the Gamilon embassy looming in the distance. Primus and Nike stood beside him, their faces a mix of hope and apprehension. The events of the past few days hung heavy in the air, the memory of the Syndicate's attack still fresh. As they disembarked, John placed a hand on each boy's shoulder. "No matter what happens in there, I'm not giving up on you. We're in this together." Primus met his gaze, his orange eyes fierce with determination. "We won't let them separate us. You're our family now." Inside the embassy, they were met with cold stares and thinly veiled hostility. The Gamilon officials, their scales gleaming under the harsh lights, regarded John with open suspicion. "A human seeking to adopt Gamilon children?" the senior official scoffed. "Preposterous. The cultural and biological differences alone make it impossible." John fought to keep his temper in check. "I've been caring for these boys for weeks. I know their needs, their fears, their dreams. I love them like my own." The official narrowed his eyes. "Love is not enough. They belong with their own kind, not with a human who can never truly understand them." Primus stepped forward, his small frame vibrating with anger. "John understands us better than anyone. He's risked his life for us, taught us, comforted us. He's our father in every way that matters." Nike clung to John's hand, tears streaming down his face. "Please don't take us away from him. We need him." The officials conferred in hushed tones, their expressions unreadable. Finally, the senior official turned back to John, his voice grudging. "We will consider a formal adoption, but only if you can prove you can provide a stable, nurturing environment for the children, a home, a steady income, a support system. If you can demonstrate this, we will revisit the matter." John's heart sank as he contemplated the enormity of the task before him. The rusty horizon was his life, his livelihood. But one look at Primus and Nike's pleading faces, and he knew what he had to do. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity, as John sold the ship, using the funds to put a down payment on a small house on a Gamelon colony world. He threw himself into establishing a new business, drawing on his years of experience in the salvage trade. But the transition was far from smooth. John, used to the solitude of space, struggled with the constant demands of planet-side life. Primus and Nike, meanwhile, grappled with the challenges of being the only Gamelon children in a predominantly human settlement. There were days when John's temper frayed, when Primus withdrew into sullen silence, when Nike's nightmares left them all exhausted and on edge. But slowly, painfully, they found their way. John learned to express his love in words and actions, to be the steady, nurturing presence the boys needed. Primus and Nike learned to trust in John's unwavering commitment, to lean on him when the weight of their loss threatened to crush them. And so when the day of the final adoption hearing arrived, they walked into the embassy as a family, bound not by blood, but by the unbreakable ties of shared struggle and fierce, defiant love. The officials, seeing the change in the little family, had no choice but to grant the adoption. As John, Primus, and Nike walked out into the bright sunlight, their hands clasped tightly together, John felt a sense of peace settle over him. The road ahead would be long and winding, full of challenges he could scarcely imagine, but with his sons by his side, he knew he could face anything the universe threw at him, because that's what family did. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.